Let's take a look at Impact XT in Studio One 4. There's been some much needed improvements made to Impact, and I'm pretty excited about what they've done. And we're going to go ahead and cover mostly everything in this tutorial. It will be a part 1 and part 2. We'll cover some other features, particularly this section here, but for now we're going to cover everything here, the most exciting stuff to get you started. And before we take a look at Impact, just know that if I come over to the Browse and Instruments, and then our Impact is here, if I go ahead and expand out here, we can see there's a lot more kits to choose from. And we actually have 1.5 gigs, at least in the professional version, of new sounds and kits for Impact. And we're just going to start from the top and work our way down. So first of all, we have pad focus here. Now, if I go ahead and trigger with my MIDI controller using the pads, take note of the waveform view here. We are stuck on the kit here. So if I select the tone, we can see the tone there. I could trigger that. But as I trigger the other ones, we are not changing the waveform display. So when we select pad focus and then I again trigger, we can see that the waveform display updates to show what we have recently triggered. And I'm actually going to just turn that off for the tutorial. Now next to that, we have the PreSonus icon here, and if we click on that, I'm sure most of you have seen, we can change the color scheme for the Impact, and just by clicking repeatedly, we cycle through these different colors. But for the tutorial, I'm just going to leave it on the default white here. Now moving on to the waveform display, we can now click, hold, and drag up or down to zoom in. I'm very happy about that. We still have our zoom slider here. And this can be adjusted by using your mouse wheel for a more precise control. We can also use the mouse wheel within the waveform display itself to zoom in and out. Also, something that I'm really happy about is we now have these markers. So we used to get a little pointer finger when we went to the edge, and it was pretty hard to adjust. You had to get used to that. But this makes it much more convenient to go ahead and come in and choose what area of the sample that we would like to play back. And before I go more into that, just know that we also have a vertical zoom here. We can click. This will not change the audio level, but just the view. And that's available by clicking here. And coming back to our markers, we can see we have a start and end display here, or fields, that will update as we move our marker. And we can actually click, hold, and drag to make fine adjustments in the field. Or we can use the mouse wheel. We can also just click and manually type in a value. So if I put in 1, we go back to the beginning there. Now, if I were to go ahead and pull this one back in and let's zoom in a bit, something else that we have is here we have left and right. This is going to take us to our left marker and center that within the waveform display. If I click the right, that's going to take us and center the right marker. Now, I really like this magnifying icon because when we click once, here we zoom in on where our markers are set. So this is the specific area that we're going to be triggering when we use our MIDI controller or click on this with the mouse. If I click again, then we are zoomed out for the complete sample. And again, clicking, we zoom in to where we have our markers. Moving on, we have a plus symbol here, which is going to allow us to add a sample to our pad, the current one that we have selected. And just know that this, if we add this to a pad that has an existing sample, it's going to add it in addition to that one. So for the moment, I'm going to just right click and clear that pad. Then I'll click the add symbol. And we can see I have a bunch of different audio files here that I put together for this tutorial. And when we select a file, we can choose to play, stop, have it loop in playback, and we can have it sync to our song tempo, which is going to be more useful for rhythmic loops, for instance. And you can see all the different files that are supported by Impact XT. We've got Wave, AIF, Music Loop, FLAC, all the way through to Rex files. So I'm going to go ahead and just open that, and it is now on our pad. Now, if I were to click the plus symbol again and then choose to load a second sample, notice that we have these two divisions now for our first sample and then our second one that we've added. If we'd ever like to remove a sample, we can just come up to its particular bracket here, right click and remove that sample. I'm going to click the plus symbol again and select this and this just to show you that we can load multiple samples at a time. Now you can see that we have three different divisions, our original 808 and so on. So we can see we can audition each sample within this pad by clicking up above here. We can actually reorder as well by click, hold, and drag. Now we have that one there. We can also adjust the velocity sensitivity by click and dragging this area here. And one thing to keep note of is that we have the file name here, which is going to be different than the pad name. These are completely different things. So as I select this center one, we've got the kick alphabetical. As I select one, we've got kick 808 and the third one. And you can see that that doesn't affect the pad name here. That's actually adjusted here. So if we can rename our pad by coming there, I'll press enter and we can see that that's been renamed. Now by default, these are going to play back based on velocity, what we have these set. So I'm going to go ahead and trigger with my MIDI controller and I'll trigger softly. Okay, so we can see how that works. But we can also change the way that this plays back by coming over to the right here into the layer mode. And right now it's set to velocity. If I go ahead and change that to round robin, then we're going to cycle between each of these three samples sequentially. So each time I trigger, we're just going to go through each one. Okay, next we have random, which is just going to play them back randomly. And then finally we have stack, which is going to play all three at the same time. I'll take that back to velocity. So now coming back to where we were, we have reverse here. So that's pretty straightforward. If I just click once, I'll go ahead and deactivate. We then have normalize, which is going to increase the overall audio of your sample. So as long as there's room to do so with this symbol, we do. So if I go ahead and click that once, we can see that that waveform gets a little bit larger or taller. Let me find a more obvious one. So maybe this one here. So you can see that a bit clearer on how that works. Now we've already seen the file name and how that relates to the pad, but just know that next to that we have right and left arrows. This is going to cycle between the files in the folder that you've got this sample from. So this is the folder that I pulled that from. You can see kick alphabetical there. So if I use the right arrow, we should move to the metalish and we can see that there. The left arrow, of course, goes to the previous sample in your folder. We've seen the start and end fields. Then next we have a box here for choosing a color from the color palette. We can change the pad. Right now it's on a default gray and white, but we can change that to whatever color we'd like. So if I come and choose the yellow, we can see that the border surrounding it changes. And then whenever you trigger that pad, the pad itself is going to change that color as well. Now next we have the fields where we can set what keys or pads are going to trigger our actual pad, or what pad on our MIDI controller or key on the MIDI controller is going to trigger our pad here. So right now it's set to C2 for this one. Now we can change this to be whatever we'd like by just clicking and then inputting a value there. We can also just, while it's highlighted, press a key on our controller and it will populate automatically. And you can see now these are both being triggered because this is G#1 as well. I can just click in this field and return back to as it was. We also have the option to put a second trigger source in here. So if I click in this field and then come again to this one here, let me do that again and use my MIDI controller. And now I can trigger this one by pressing just C2 on the drum pads, but I can also press G#1 on my pad and it's going to trigger this as well because we've set it here. Now, in order to get rid of this, you would want to use the dash on your QWERTY keyboard, press enter, and now it's back to as it was before. Moving on, we have trigger mode, and the trigger mode determines the behavior of our sample when we press a key or pad on our controller or just trigger it with our mouse. So this is on one shot. We'll start with this, and basically the one shot is going to play it straight through for the length of the sample. We do have the option to turn on toggle. So if I activate the toggle, then when I press it a second time, it's going to stop the sample. I'll take that off for now. Then we have loop. And if I just press and release, then it's going to stop. But if I hold, it's going to continue to play that back. And if I activate the toggle here, I can just press once and it's going to continue to play that back until I press it again. And then finally we have normal, and then in the normal mode is going to make use of our amp settings here. So if I just click once or press once on my controller and release, it's going to stop because our release is set all the way down. Now if I were to take the release all the way up, it's going to play that sample all the way through. I'm going to take this back to one shot. Now we then have our choke groups here, and this is set to off right now. The options that we have are self, and I haven't been able to figure out why this isn't working. I would think that you press once and then you press again and it chokes itself. But instead it just re-triggers the pad. But anyhow, we now have 32 groups instead of 4 that were in the original impact. So if I would go ahead and put this in choke group 1 and put this one into choke group 1, then we can see that pressing this will then stop the playback of this sample here because they're in the same choke group. I'm sure most of you are all aware of that. I'm going to just set these back to off. Now we have quantize, and this is a new feature within Impact, and this is basically going to limit your playback and recording of the sample to whatever value that you have set within this drop-down menu here. So it's off right now. So if I were to go ahead and play back, turn on the click track, then let me so I can trigger this anywhere that I'd like when this is set to off. If I change this to bars, then no matter how many times I trigger on my controller, I'm just pressing it repeatedly, and it's only triggering at the beginning of each bar. Now, if I stop depressing the pad, then we're not going to have any sound. So bars is going to trigger only at the beginning of each bar. Then we have beats. It's only going to allow you to trigger on each beat. I'm just pressing repeatedly, and I'm restricted to every beat. Then we have half beats, which is going to be eighth notes. Okay, and then the last one that we have is quarter beats, which is going to only allow every 16th note. And this really only functions when you are in playback mode or recording. Next we have follow tempo, and I'm going to change the bank here and use one of these loops to demonstrate this. Okay, so that's how that sounds at 120 beats per minute, which is our current tempo. Now, if I were to change this to 90 beats per minute and then re-trigger, okay, so you get the idea. This is going to follow along with our song tempo. Okay. Now your audio sample does need to have BPM information encoded into it for this to work. And when you import a file that does not have BPM data, say we were to come back to the add, and then this kick, say it's not going to have data encoded in it. But when you sync this tempo and leave that checked, it's going to input whatever tempo you have set here. I'm pretty sure. Don't quote me on that. But I think that's what happened when I've tried this before. So it's going to put 120 onto this 808. But, you know, an 808, it's not really going to be affected too much with this setting. Moving on, we have offsets. And let's come back to a different bank. This is basically going to determine, it's going to work similar to the left and right markers here in how they control what's played back from your sample. So if I were to increase the start here a bit, you can see how we're starting back there. Let me take that back down a little bit. And then as I continue to go, we allow more of that sample to play back. And this just gives you a bit more finer control in the sample playback. And if you're having an issue with clicks or pops, then you can come in and put a value here. This is in milliseconds. So you can really fine tune how that sample is being triggered. And the end works similar. It's just going to affect the end of your sample. Now below the offsets, we have all notes off. So that's basically just going to stop any sounds that you have playing back. If you ever have loaded up a full song into Impact, which I have on many occasions, and you want it to stop, there was not a feature to make it do that before. And now we have the all notes off, which is incredibly helpful. So next we have edit sample, and this is available for working with this pad because we have 3 different samples in here. If I were to select this one here, we only have 1 sample loaded in the pad. So this is not available. And the reason why that is because if we have 3 different samples, we may not want to apply the same edits to all of the samples. So if I wanted to just affect, say, the 808 here, then I would click on edit sample while that's highlighted. Then say if I lower the pitch down, so then the other ones are not affected. And then if I have the layer mode and stack to trigger all 3 at the same time, we can hear that they're not affected. So I'll just come back to that one, edit that sample. We can see that then the pitch is changed here. I'll control click to take that back to as it was, come out of that individual edit mode. And that's how that works. We then have reset, which I could have used to take the adjustment back to how it originally was. So if I take this one edit sample, take that back down again, maybe adjust the tuning, the decay, and instead of readjusting all of those, just click on the reset and that will take those back. Now moving on, we have our pad banks, which we've already seen when I clicked on this to come to our little vocal sample there. One thing to keep note of is that we have these bars to the right of these banks. They're not there on any bank that does not have any samples loaded. So we only have samples loaded on A and B, so we do have these bars. And whenever you trigger, you're going to see an activity LED, or the LED's going to light up. And so even if you're on pad or bank A and you've got activity on B, so you have a MIDI part that's triggering parts within B, this is going to light up to give you a better idea of what's going on, where your sounds are coming from, because with all of these different banks, you can kind of get lost you can lose your sound. So having these let you know where activity is taking place is going to help you out. Now within our pads we have solo and mute. We're all familiar with those. And if you ever want to select a pad without triggering the sound, just click in the blank area between the solo and mute and your output settings. And that's what we have next is our output. We can see that a pad is in stereo or mono by the icon here. Everything is in stereo because we have the two circles there. But if I click here and then we now have 16 stereos to choose from and 16 monos. And if I were to choose mono 1 for this pad, we can see that we not only have the one circle indicating that it's mono and going out on channel 1 mono. Now if I were to close this out and then open up the mixer, we can see now that we have our mono 1 channel added here. So we have stereo 1 through 8 active within the console. And just know that if I bring up the impact and let's send this out to mono 2, then Studio One is going to automatically add that extra channel. See, that pops up there. Now, one other thing to keep in mind is if you're trying to organize the console, say you have channels that you are not using or you think you're not using, and you come up to the area here and deactivate. We know we're using 2, but I'm just trying to make an example here. That channel goes away within the console, but this is still on that mono number 2 and it's gone. So if you're ever having audio problems, that's one area that you want to look into. Now if I come back up here and activate the mono 2, we have our audio again. Okay, and I think we'll wrap up here. This wasn't the most exciting thing. We're just covering the parameters here so that you have a better understanding of how Impact XT works, what it's capable of, and you know what techniques that you use for your production. And now you know what is available here and if it's going to be of benefit to you or not. I'm really happy with the improvements. And so in part 2, we're going to take a look at the pitch filter and amp sections. And a couple other things, maybe some production tips. And for now, we will wrap up here. Thanks for watching.